Welcome to the Emeth podcast. I am your host, Alexander, and this is Connor, my co-host.
What's up?
Last episode, we talked about the purpose of the Bible. How did you feel about that episode, Connor?
Felt pretty good about it. I think we touched on a lot of important ideas and information in the last episode. I'm trying to remember a lot of it because it feels like a long time ago.
Well, it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah, it was really fun. Check out that podcast. Today, we're going to look at some heroes of the faith. We're going to look at church history. Don't you love church history, Connor?
Oh, yeah. Nothing gets me more excied than church history.
This episode, this is going to be part one. These next few episodes have been difficult for me. A lot of studying and a lot of trying to make sure that I have the correct information. And so I hope that studying will help pay off in the long run. But we're going to find out, aren't we? Yeah. Well, so the years that we're going to look at are going to be, we're going to look at three different ages in this episode. We're going to look at the age of Jesus and the apostles, right? Which starts with Jesus's birth. And ultimately, and then ends not when Jesus dies, but actually when the temple is destroyed in Jerusalem. That is kind of the cutting off point, which we'll find out why. Then we're going to look at the age of Catholic Christianity. Catholic meaning universal. That goes till about 312, when ultimately Christianity is no longer a minority religion, but becomes the state religion. And then after that, in 312, we're going to look at the age of the Christian Roman Empire, which will close up at about 590 AD. For some of you who may be curious, I'm using AD not because I'm anti-science. Some people prefer to use the Common Era. For me, I don't really see a reason to do that because the Common Era, before Common Era, still is based upon the birth of Jesus Christ. So it's like, at some point, it's the same thing. So
It's the same dates, just a different title.
Right.
Doesn't matter a whole lot.
Yeah. So, but so we're gonna jump into that. Are you excited, Connor?
Oh, pumped! Just so excited.
Pumped,
I do think church history is interesting, and I think it's important to understand where it comes from, so that we can kind of better understand where it's going and learn from the past and the different heroes in the past, right? The different influential people in this whole journey of Christianity and the church. So
you get a more holistic understanding. I think something that's really easy for a lot of people to do, especially like Protestants, is to kind of forget about where we came from. And it's like you read Acts, and then Acts ends, and then there's just like this time void, this like a vortex, and then suddenly, boom, today.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, hold up. Like, there was a ton of history between when Paul died and when we started living, And, the Reformation and whatnot. So I think that's really cool. Those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. That's one of my favorite quotes. I like saying that.
It's a good quote.
Yeah.
It's true.
So we're going to start with the age of Jesus and the apostles. Starts roughly around, say, like 6 BC, maybe, give or take. Originally, some calendar people were trying to guess when Jesus was born, and they guessed wrong. They're slightly off by a few years.
Those dang calendar people.
Yeah, I know. So it's not quite perfect, but Yeah. So, what is church? What is the church? Well, in Acts chapter 2, we see the church being started. The Greek word for church is, you want to say it for me, Connor?
Ecclesia.
Ecclesia.
Alex really struggles with this word.
I do struggle with this word. I keep on wanting to say, what do I keep on wanting to say? Ecclesia?
Ecclesia,
Yeah, I keep on wanting to say ecclesia.
Ecclesia.
Ecclesia. Yeah, ecclesia. It basically means the way. It's the way. Okay. So I kept on wanting to say, "Do you know the way?"
Yeah, I figured. I got that.
So bad that brain
that's
rot.
where it was going.
But yeah. So, ecclesia. Is that how you say it?
Hey, there
Ecclesia.
you go. He's learning.
The church. That's
Let's
the
go.
church. This church is started, and we see the church being formed in Acts. Devotees of the church are called Christianoi or something, some word like that, which I'm pretty sure means anointed one. Or Christians became the Christians. And so this is a really cool moment, and we see that in Acts, and we see the word Christian being used in Acts, which I actually hadn't known before. I didn't think Christian was actually in the Bible, but it is in Acts, which is just wild. Something that we see with the early Christians is they have these two traditions. They have the tradition of baptism and the tradition of the Lord's Supper. Baptism is kind of the initiation when you're converted. It's kind of a purification ritual where you wash away your old self and are made new in Christ, and you have this new identity in Christ. And then the Lord's Supper is kind of a tradition that kind of seals. It's kind of sealing you to your congregation, and so other Christians. It's kind of viewed as this ritual where you come together and break bread together and remember Christ's sacrifice, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. Well, and this is kind of foreshadowing for future episode, but we're going to be talking about heresy in a future episode.
Yeah.
And with those two ideas, there are a lot of different ideas and debates that came out of this age and even the future ages that came after the age of the apostles and Jesus. Debating on baptism, if it was actually made you clean, if it was necessary. A lot of different ideas with just baptism, and then with communion, or eating the bread, and the supper, right? All the different ideas of if it's actually the body and turns into the body and blood of Jesus or not, and so just
which Christians still debate about.
Oh but a lot of the core ideas came out of this time of
that's for sure.
history. So something to look forward to in a future episode.
Some heroes who let's look at some heroes during this age. Connor, do you know who a man named Jesus is? You have any idea?
It sounds kind of familiar, but I don't know.
Jesus, Yeshua,
I think I know a Jesus.
You think you know a Jesus? Yeah.
Lives in California, I think.
Oh, gotcha. Nice. Jesus. Whoa. Jesus is a pretty cool dude. Something of note is Jesus didn't write anything down. He didn't write it. It's a debate. So this is a debate. People are unsure if Jesus only spoke Aramaic, but if he also spoke Greek as well. And so it's there's kind of a debate, and we're not entirely sure. But for the most part, he didn't write anything down. Everything that was written down was written by his followers, or people pretending to be his followers. So that's really interesting. He mostly remained in the Jewish area, which is very interesting, right? Jesus kind of mostly focused on the Jews. Now, he did interact with Samaritans and Gentiles. He did interact with them, but primarily he kind of focused on the Jews, which is very, very interesting idea.
Yeah.
James also does the same thing after Jesus' death and resurrection, is he hangs out in Jerusalem and he kind of focuses on the Jews. And then when the temple is destroyed in 70, it is ultimately is when he dies, which is kind of depressing. Rip James, rest in peace. But yeah, he called himself the Son of Man, and people we see call in the Gospels, we see people calling him the Son of God, which is kind of wild. Kind of the idea that he is the one who was foreshadowed, prophesied about in the scriptures, and he not only he didn't come to get rid of the Torah or the law, but he came to fulfill the law. And so we see him throughout his life. He continues to fulfill the law, whether it's through, him riding in on a donkey into Jerusalem, or doing particular signs and wonders that confirm that he is Jesus, or ultimately the fact that it is by his wounds that we have been healed, which is what Isaiah tells us would happen, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Ultimately, he died for the sins of all people, the whole world. He came to save the whole world. Does that mean everyone is saved? Not necessarily. Some people argue, those universalists out there argue that yes, the whole world is saved, but others argue that you have to come to believe and accept that Jesus Christ is the Lord of your life. Not just with your words, but with your actions and with your heart, which I think is really cool. And he died, but then he also rose again, and is currently, it's so interesting, like I was talking to a Christian the other day, and they didn't know where Jesus was right now. Like someone asked them, where's Jesus right now? And they were like, I don't know. It's like, well, he's seated at the right hand of God. We hear about that in Hebrews and other places throughout Scripture, that he is at the right hand of God right now, waiting to return again whenever God gives him the
all clear.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, which is super cool.
Yeah.
Then we've got Paul, my main man, Paul.
Good old Paul.
Good old Paul, the theologian's delight. I don't know. Stuff like that.
What?
Just more like, so I asked someone, who would you prefer to meet up with? Like any Bible character, right? Besides Jesus.
Yeah,
obviously.
you can't pick Jesus.
Who would you want to have a conversation with and meet up with?
Yeah.
And like any theologian would like want to meet up with Paul.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. So, yeah. Paul's the dude.
Right, he's the goat. Paul was originally a Pharisee who was converted to Christianity. Something that's really interesting is that a lot of theology is from Paul. A lot of church theology, a lot of Christian theology is from Paul himself. He was probably the most influential person besides Jesus for all of Christianity, who very much influenced it. Whereas Jesus was primarily for the Jews, Paul kind of focused on the Gentiles and became the apostle of the Gentiles, which I think is really interesting. Interesting.
Which I feel like you could say he's like one of the most important for Christian theology, and then like Peter for the church.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because Jesus, right, built the church on Peter, but
right.
Like, he's the one who kind of like organized and started the church, and then it went from there and is to where it is now. And I mean, same with the theology that Paul brought.
Yeah.
So it was like together they kind of formed this complete church in a way.
Yeah, that's a good point. He probably died during Emperor Nero's persecution. The last we hear from him in Acts is he's hanging out in Rome for a couple years, waiting for his trial, and chances are he probably died. The reason Luke doesn't specify is probably because Luke was kind of afraid of zealots, with it, like Christian zealots trying to revolution. Let's bring the revolution, but was trying to avoid that, so didn't quite mention when Paul died.
Like afraid they would like rise up if they heard he died, or
like give him. So it's something that we see a lot in the Gospels and in the New Testament writings is a neutrality when it comes to Rome and the Roman Empire. It's very neutral. Pharisees, okay, those guys are the bad guys, but the Romans, they're just people.
Just
they're
kind of
very
there,
neutral.
Leave them alone.
Yeah, and so an interpretation of why that is kind of like the Israelites were known to be rebellious. They were zealots, right? Simon the Zealot, one of the disciples himself, was a previous zealot, and was very like, let's fight Rome, let's fight the Roman Empire, let's bring our freedom. The Messiah is coming, and so the fact that Jesus was there was kind of and something that you see is like, even though Pilate is the one who sentences Jesus to die, it's very clear that it wasn't him, right? It was the Jewish leaders. They're the ones to blame. And so kind of making that distinction in order to prevent religious uprising against Rome, and then even more people dying. That wasn't exactly Jesus's or Paul's intention, or the apostles. So yeah,
interesting.
It is really interesting. Yeah. This era ultimately was ended when the temple was destroyed in 70. There was an attack on Jerusalem, and the temple was destroyed. Not only did it kind of usher in a distinction between Jews and Christians more definitely, because up until this point, the Romans kind of viewed them as synonymous for the most part. Like they were a sect of Judaism. But after the temple was destroyed, it was really clear to the Romans that no, Christianity is its own thing. We also see with the death of the Second Temple, the death of Second Temple Judaism, which, because modern day Judaism is not Second Temple Judaism, it's Rabbinic Judaism. And so it kind of, because originally Judaism, an Israelite religion, was very temple focused. It was very temple focused, but then after you don't have a temple, right? The Sadducees were people of the temple, and they died out, whereas the Pharisees were people of the book, and they ultimately became modern day Jews, rabbinic Jews, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
I think back to Paul for a second.
Yeah.
So I think an important distinction and just kind of thing to point out is, like Alex was saying before, of how Jesus came for the Jews and primarily focused on them. Paul was called to the Gentiles and the people who weren't Jewish.
Yeah.
And he caught some flack from the other disciples and stuff. We can see in the Bible of them kind of debating over like whether this is right and what you should be doing.
Right.
But he makes it like very clear that Jesus came or cares about the Gentiles just as much as he cares about the Jews.
Yeah.
And God uses Paul to share that message and share Jesus with so many more people.
Yeah.
Because previously, for like thousands of years, it had been the Jews were God's people. And he walked with them. And, there were a couple other groups that God like blessed and worked through and things like that through history. But it was primarily the Jews.
Yeah.
So then Paul comes on the scene and is like, no, actually, it's the Gentiles too. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? Like, you're crazy. And so, it's just really interesting, like the way that Paul is ministering to the Gentiles.
Yeah. And it wasn't necessarily a new idea that the Israelites, all of the nations would be blessed through the Israelites, through Abraham's seed, through David's seed. Like, that was a concept, but they didn't fully understand what that meant.
Yeah.
And it's not until Jesus came, who was the fulfillment of that.
Yeah.
And then once he died and rose again, he, through his sacrifice, we are now blessed as Gentiles, because me and you, neither of us are Jewish.
No.
Right? So we are blessed through Jesus Christ. And the only way that we know about it is because people preached to the Gentiles and converted them. Paul did his stuff. It's really cool. So that was kind of the end of the age of Jesus and the apostles. A lot of the persecution started killing off apostles, and when you look at the canon of Scripture, the temple being destroyed is almost like a wake-up call for a lot of Christians, because up until this point, they've just been relying upon the testimony of the apostles who were just right there, you know?
Yeah.
But then apostles start dying off, and people are like, oh, shoot, we should probably, like, write down their testimony so we don't lose it for all of time.
Yeah.
And so you see, like, Matthew and Luke being written around this time, as a, like, maybe we should write this down real quick, which is really interesting. Yeah, but the age of Catholic Christianity. It's really interesting. Connor, do you know what Catholic means?
Universal?
Yeah.
That's what it says on the page.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, on the notes.
Universal, yeah.
Yeah, universal. This is in contrast to local, right? So you have local independent churches, right? One in Ephesus, one in Corinth, one in Philippi. Is that what it is? Pretty sure that's what it is.
Sounds right.
Yeah, sounds right. Thessalonica. You have all these independent local churches, but then you have the universal church, like the big C church. The Catholic church, the universal church. Catholic is a word that means universal. We also look, when you look at Orthodox, the Orthodox church, that like means, Orthodox means truth, which is in contrast to heresy. And so obviously you have, now you have the Roman Catholic Latin Church, and then you have the Eastern Orthodox Church. But ultimately, the definitions of Catholic and Orthodox are universal and truth, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
During this period, Connor, what type of people do you think were Christians? Like what kind of people? Like, would you guess?
I mean, probably like the lower class people is what I would guess. 'Cause, I mean, a lot of the higher class people were either like Roman officials or higher up in the Roman government.
Yeah.
Prominent, like, businessmen kind of people, or like religious leaders in Judaism. Right?
Yeah.
So it would make more sense that like the lower class people would be Christians.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And we know that. So most of the Christians during the age of Catholic Christianity were slaves, women, traders, soldiers, all the people who don't matter, all the...
just gonna...
Yeah. We know this because, okay, so it's actually really interesting. We have different letters sent between different critics of Christians. You have Pliny. Wait, no, that's not right. Pliny, whatever. He's the governor of Bithynia. Yeah. He wrote to Emperor Trajan, whatever his name is. Trajan or whatever. This is around 112 AD. And he wrote that those who were Christians, many in every period of life, on every level of society, of both sexes, in towns and villages, and scattered throughout the countryside. So these are like farmer people. But it's kind of like universal. Every period of life, so you have young people and old people. Every level of society, so you do have esteemed people with prestige, but you also have people who are really poor, and then both men and women, or Christians. It's kind of weird. Celsus, who was like an avid critic of Christianity, wrote that far from us, say the Christians, be any man possessed of any culture or wisdom or judgment. Their aim is to convince only worthless, contemptible people, idiots, slaves, poor women, and children. These are the only ones whom they manage to turn into believers, which is really interesting. So this was a critic of Christianity who was condemning Christianity because they only seem to convert the worthless people, the people who don't matter, which is kind of funny. And then you have Emperor Julian, who was alive between 332 and 363. And he kind of, so he was against Christianity. He wanted to get rid of Christianity and kind of bring back the ancient pagan practices in their faith. But he was kind of stumped. He had difficulties with that because the problem is Christians were so good at serving the poor that no one wanted to not be Christian at that point, right? Like, he writes atheism, which is Christianity. They're referred to as atheists because they deny the existence of gods. Atheism has been especially advanced through the loving service rendered to strangers and through their care for the burial of the dead. It is a scandal that there is not a single Jew who is a beggar, and that the godless Galileans care not only for their own poor, but for ours as well, while those who belong to us look in vain for the help that we should render them. Which I think is so beautiful, that you see Christians loving each other so well that even the people who are trying to get rid of Christianity is like, they love each other too well. We need to step up our game in order to fight them or whatever, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Something else we see though during this period is that Christianity comes under a lot of persecution, and so it's if you're a Christian, you have a lot on the line. You have a lot at stake. It's almost like being a Christian in modern day, like Middle East or China. You know, it's like, it's kind of you have a lot on the line if you are a Christian, or in India as well. And yet Christianity seemed to spread faster than ever before. And there are some reasons for this. So one reason is that Christians had a conviction. They had a lot of passionate conviction about these things, which is really contagious and powerful. When you're really passionate about something, it's easy for someone else to also get really passionate about something, which is really cool. Another thing is the gospel felt a need, like a widely experienced need in the hearts of people, right? It spoke to what people were seeking, which is really cool. And another reason is that Christians, like we looked at, were really good at loving each other, like really good. And so, it kind of spread really rapidly. And then it's funny, and like the last reason that I have here is that the persecution itself publicized the Christian faith, which made it even more like popular. You have people like Polycarp who are martyred and like completely like sold out and so ready to die for their faith. And other Christians can't help. I mean, non-believers can't help but see that and be like, whoa, okay, that person was willing to die for this. Okay, well, maybe there's some truth to it. Maybe there's something real in it. Yeah. Which I think is really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like the persecution had the opposite effect.
Yeah.
Like, they were like, oh, we're going to shove this down and make it to where, no one believes this.
Yeah.
But in that whole process, they were just like, hey, look at this cool faith. Like, look at this thing that these people are doing, what they believe and everything. Yeah. I think it's wild how through this whole era of persecution and I mean, all of these critics, right, and all of these different ideas coming out
Yeah.
About Christianity, that through all of that pushback, it still spread so much,
Yeah.
and still grew so much. I don't know. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is really cool.
I think it's interesting how they like talk about how it's focusing on the poor and the slaves and the right, like the person says like the meaningless people in society.
Yeah,
pretty much.
worthless. Yeah.
And
Celsius.
yeah, how it was like primarily those people who were Christians,
Hmm.
and then you look at the Bible and it talks about how it's hard for like a rich man to become a Christian, and Jesus primarily focuses on the afflicted and like the lepers, right, and the people like the people on the brink and the edges of society, like the outcasts, and the forgotten, the hurting, the broken, and it's like even after Jesus wasn't physically there, it's like that followed through in Christianity, and is still like the undercurrent of Christianity, of like the needy and the broken, and the forgotten. So I think that's what made it so effective. Like you said, like it was reaching like something in their hearts, right? It clicked. It made sense. Like it was filling something that was missing. So yeah, it's really cool to like look at that, and I think it's a great example of like what we can aspire to today in the church. Of what the early church was like.
It's almost like Jesus when he told the apostles and the disciples, "You will be known for your love." It's almost as if that was a prophecy that we see like came true. Like we see that they are known to the pagans for their love for one another and for their care for the poor and the poor women and the slaves, you know, all the people who aren't supposed to matter, all the people who aren't supposed to have value. And yet Jesus gives them value, and we see the early Christians giving them value as well, which I think is really cool. Well, I
think that kind of begs the question, like, as the Christian church today, like, what are we known for? You know, what do people know us for? It's I don't think it's love.
It's so interesting because Justin, my pastor, he worked at a church. He was pastoring at a church, and it kind of his time with the church had been up, and he was kind of interviewing with other churches, and so people came over to see what his preaching was like, and they got dinner after he preached at the church he was leaving, and the guy's like, "Okay, do you think the Holy Spirit was in that sermon?" And Justin was like, "Nope, it was not." And he's like, "Oh, I appreciate your honesty. Do you think it was because of you or because of the people?" And he's like, 100% the people. And this is after like so much drama happening within the church where they falsely accuse him of various things, or the past two pastors, one of them had stolen money from the church, and then the other one had had a scandal with at least one woman. There were rumors of two women that he slept with, and so just a lot of like ungodly behavior happening, and then he shows up, and then look at that, there's even more, you know, there just wasn't the presence of the Holy Spirit within that church. And that's where the Holy Spirit's supposed to be. And I think so much of church in the West has gone away from this mentality, and we're going to look at how Constantinople kind of transformed the identity of the church, and we'll see more corruption within the church, because this is during the time of like persecution. If you were a Christian, you lost everything. And so there was no, like, if you were in it, you were in it. Because you had the pressure of society, kind of almost like a crucible where it just you're purified through this experience, and it's really the culture purifies your faith, which we see Paul talking about, which I think is interesting. I think a really good hero, because we're talking about heroes of the faith. We looked at Jesus and Paul. We looked at some people who commented on early Christians. I think a really good hero is Polycarp, who was a martyr. He lived his life for Christ. He was a disciple of John the Apostle, according to various sources. He ultimately, so persecution came because Christians were, there was a lot of superstitions around them and suspicions about, okay, Christians they were accused of incest, of having incestuous orgies. They were attacked for cannibalism. It's like, what the heck? Where's all this stuff coming from? Well, when you don't know anything about Christianity, but you hear Christians talking about meeting in secret with their brothers and sisters and eating the flesh and the blood of their gods, and that
sounds a little weird.
Yeah, it gets kind of weird. And so those who didn't know anything about it were really confused about them having these love feasts, these agape feasts. Like, that sounds like an orgy, having a love feast, and different stuff like that. So they were also accused of being atheists. We talked about that because they denied that gods not only existed, but they denied the tribute of gods. They may have viewed gods as being demons, and so was like, no, I'm not going to give tribute to this demon. And so, which is a really interesting concept that I want to talk more about at some point. Yeah, and then there's constant emperor worship, which kind of really picked up with Darius, and then a lot of persecution happened with him, which is very interesting. But I think the most profound part of Polycarp's life is his martyrdom. People tell him, hey, you need to deny Christ. He says, no, for 86 years I have been Christ's servant, and he has done me no wrong. And how can I now blaspheme my king who saves me? You threaten me with fire which burns for an hour at most. You must not know about the fire of the coming judgment and of the eternal punishment reserved for the ungodly. Why are you wasting time? Kill me in whatever way you see fit. I think that's so powerful.
Dude, yeah.
Yeah.
What a sick quote.
Yeah.
Why are you wasting time? Kill me in whatever way you see fit.
Yeah. It's like,
That's
you threaten me with fire for an hour but there's fire in hell for all of eternity, and I'm not gonna give him to that. Yeah.
What a guy. That's so sick.
Yeah, this dude was really cool. Yeah, so he's a hero of the faith, we see, and it's cool because he is also the disciple of John, which I think's wild. We also have a controversy during this period between Novatian and Cornelius, both of Rome. They were both, I think the term, kind of like a deacon sort of thing, kind of like that position. There was a particular term for it. I can't remember what it's called right now. But they were kind of in that position, kind of not a bishop, but almost like under the bishop. There was like a group of them. And they both were of Rome. And they both... So with all this persecution happening, there were some people who never gave in, right? You would be, if you're accused of being a Christian, they would bring you into a room and ask you, are you a Christian? And then ask you to pay a tribute and offer some little incense to the Caesar or whatever, and worship him and whatever. And Christians were like, no, we're not doing this. But some people, when the persecution really started ramping up and where they were being tortured and mutilated and tortured, and all you had to do was just light a little incense and say Caesar is Lord, and then you're good. And it's like so easy, such an easy way out. And so there would be people who would give in and would do the thing, go through the motions, and then stop the persecution. And so there became this controversy of, okay, well, these people who have lapsed, like, what are we going to do with them? Because they are still wanting to come to church, right? After the persecution ended, they want to come back. And it's like, but there are people who suffered for such a long time, who endured the suffering, like in the torture. And so how can they both be Christians? Like, one has to be a Christian and one has to not be a Christian. And so that was the argument of Novation. Whereas Cornelius was like, okay, I get that. But God is the God of grace. And we have to have grace on the lapsed. And so the Novation was against letting the lapsed back into the church, whereas Cornelius, who, side note, eventually became the bishop of Rome. Catholics call him a pope, one of the popes, but this is kind of before the supremacy of the papacy really was a thing. Cornelius, he argued that for them to have grace on them and let the lapsed rejoin the church. This concept, Novation, was all for the saints. The church is a society of saints. That is what the church is. And when you sin, you are no longer a saint. Whereas Cornelius saw church more as a school for sinners, right? We're saints, but we also still sin. We still have a sin nature. And this concept leads to so many questions of, most Christians at this time understood that, okay, Christ's punishment paid for all of our sins up until you're saved, right? And then you're saved. You're a new creation. You don't go around sinning anymore. What about when you sin after you're saved? And this is like a problem. This is like what happens after you're supposed to be set apart. You're supposed to be different. And I think this is where purgatory kind of came into existence, is out of this question, this problem. It's like, well, you do pay for the sins after Jesus. But Cornelius is saying that we are saints who still sin, who still need the grace of God. And we see Augustine also saying a similar thing, which we're going to look at him. He's a cool dude.
Yeah, dude.
He's a cool dude. Yeah.
What a guy.
Yeah. Such an interesting idea, don't you think,
is,
Connor?
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I do think it's really interesting. I think you can kind of even still see that today of now it looks different and is in kind of a different light, I guess.
Sure, yeah.
But it's kind
different
of the
context.
Yeah, like kind of the idea of like wanting the church to stay clean, right? Like a lot of times you kind of get this feeling that like, they don't want like homeless people or like dirty people
yeah,
or like
right.
And like even the way that a lot of times we as Christians like project ourselves or show ourselves to other people is like this like perfect image of like, oh, we don't mess up, we don't sin, like our lives are great, everything's good, everything's great.
Yeah.
But in reality, it is more like what Cornelius believed and talked about of, we are saints, but we are still sinners.
Yeah.
Like we are imperfect and we are in need of God's grace and his forgiveness. And I think that's very evident in the Bible. Looking through it Peter denied Jesus 3 times.
Yeah.
That's the same thing that these people were doing, is denying Jesus and saying that they don't believe in him so that they could save their lives.
Yeah.
But God still extended grace to him.
Yeah.
And forgave him for that. So yeah, I think that's still something we deal with today. But
That's such a good connection.
I think it's a really interesting thing that this is something that they dealt with back then.
Yeah.
I never thought about with persecution, like the people who gave in to it. But obviously it happened.
Yeah.
So I think it's really cool that there were people like Cornelius back then that were able to say, no, like it's okay. These people are still loved by Jesus
Yeah.
and by God and are able to be forgiven.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of times something that people need to hear today.
Yeah.
It's like no matter what you've done, if you've denied God
Yeah.
and denied Jesus, like there is still a way. Like
Yeah.
there's still grace and forgiveness in that.
Still restoration.
Yeah, I mean, he is the
Yeah.
God of restoration
Yeah.
and forgiveness.
Yeah.
So yeah, of course there's still a way.
Yeah. I think that's a really good connection to Peter as a really prime example of Jesus doing this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another hero we have is Clement of Alexandria. Do you know Clement?
Clement?
Clement. It's so Clement means like merciful.
Huh.
It's actually like a word in the English language.
What?
Yeah, like I was reading my book on, I think it was Alexander the Great. Maybe it was, I think it was Alexander the Great. I was reading a book on it, and he just said clemency.
Huh.
And I was like, oh, I think that's the first time I had ever seen it.
Like used as a word?
Yeah.
Huh. I kind of like that name though, Clement.
Hey, I don't steal it.
I mean,
don't steal it. I'm gonna name my kid Clement. That's my plan.
Probably gonna have a kid before I do. So
that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Clement of Alexandria. You know about Origen,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot.
Yeah. Clement was kind of Origen's teacher. He was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So Clement of Alexandria, his teacher was Pantaenus. Pantaenus founded a Christian school teaching orthodoxy, knowledge, and philosophy. It was like a Gnostic school, but not a Gnostic in the sense of the heresy of Gnosticism, but Gnostic in the sense of a school of knowledge. It taught orthodoxy from a more thinking perspective, and Clement came along and kind of took up the mantle after Pantaenus died. Clement is known fondly as the first Christian scholar. He managed to untangle misconceptions and errors that Hellenistic people, ways in which they had interpreted Christianity incorrectly, and he was able to untangle those misinterpretations and be able to explain Christianity for the first time to like Greek people, and explain it to them in ways that made sense to them.
What's a Hellenistic interpretation? What does that mean?
Hellenistic is just like Greek, so misunderstandings of like, we kind of talked a little bit about like, the whole idea cannibalists, like, or they eating flesh and drinking, but from a more philosophical perspective of different ways that Greeks may have misunderstood what the Bible was saying. So we see this with language. This happens a lot with language, where you'll have a phrase or an idea that with one culture, their language, they like have a translation for that. Putting your foot in your mouth means that you're tongue tied. You're just falling over your words. Whereas some cultures don't have the same word. They may have a different phrase, or maybe they won't even have the concept for that particular idea to begin with. And so when you have this Hebrew book, you have this Jewish based religion with these Jewish ideas that were centuries old, and you're bringing them into a new cultural context. It's not just a translation of the language that needs to be done. It's also a kind of translation of the ideas. And so Clement was able to do that. Some people argued he was too Hellenistic. Some people were like, you're going against Christianity by explaining Christianity in Hellenistic terms. But he was able to do that. And we may when we look at the heresies, we may look at some of those misinterpretations or misunderstandings. The Gnostics were infamous for misunderstanding the point of the Hebrew Bible.
In some pretty drastic ways.
Yeah. But he was really cool. I really admire him, the first Christian scholar.
Mm.
His student Origen took over. He was a worldly student. He very much sought for the whole Bible to speak for itself, not just, taking bits and pieces and interpreting them, but taking the whole Bible and making it speak for itself. He also, for those universalists out there, he was the first universalist, I'm pretty sure, or pretty close to it, recorded. And so that was an interesting. I mean, if you're universalist, you believe that Jesus was universalist. So yeah,
It's true.
And probably Paul. I don't know, but he the way. So in my textbook, the way that the author explains it is he explains that there's this ideal, this desire for all people to be reconciled to God in the end. And Origen took it a step further by making this desire, he claimed it was true. And which took the step into heresy, which ultimately got him kind of condemned. Like the Eastern Orthodox Church do not see him as a saint at all. And I'm pretty sure the Catholic Church similarly, because of his teachings on universalism. Which is very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah. Cool dudes. I really like those dudes.
Solid guys.
Yeah. Another cool dude. If you don't have any thoughts, if you have thoughts.
I know. Okay. I need to look into Clement more because he sounds like a cool dude.
He is a cool dude. Constantine.
Yeah, good old Constantine.
So as we enter into the last age, the age of the Christian Roman Empire, it's sparked by Constantine, who converts to Christianity. There's this famous story, and I don't have this written down in my notes, so I may say it wrong. But there's this famous story that Constantine was sieging this city, and he wasn't sure if he was gonna be able to do it. And then he had a vision of a symbol that he claimed was a Christian symbol. And it's been used in Christianity at various times. I had never seen it before. I learned about this story. But he had this vision, and Jesus was like, I will give you success or whatever, or if you do these things. And he eventually, he does the things, and then he wins. And he's like, interesting, because I think the things that he was supposed to do was put the Christian symbol on the shields of all of his warriors. And if he did that, then he would win. And so he did that, and then he won. And so then that was kind of the moment. I mean, his mom was Christian, and so he was familiar with Christianity, but he wasn't fully into it.
Yeah.
But then after that moment, that's the story. Whether it's true or not, we don't actually know. But he converted to Christianity. Some people say that he wasn't a true convert, that he was just trying to unify the Roman Empire under one big religion. I haven't fully been convinced of that, mostly because the way that Rome was unifying people was by having multiple gods. They
just add them on to the list of Roman gods.
Right.
Yeah.
You have your god of your section, and you have your god of your section, and you have your god of your section. And when you become a part of my empire, well, your god is just in the pantheon. Your god is just one of the gods.
Yeah.
And that's how they became more and more united, is through polytheism.
Yeah. As long as you also worship the Caesar, then you're
right.
good. Yeah,
you
can worship whoever else you want.
Yes. And so telling everyone that your gods are false and that you should worship this god instead is more of a divisive thing. But there are more scholarly arguments for that, for and against that concept, but it's up for debate whether he was an authentic Christian or not. What we do know is that he's the one who helped us have the councils. So you have Council of Nicaea, Constantinople, Ephesus, Chalcedon, and these councils helped fortify orthodoxy against heresy. And so when we talk about our heresy, we'll dive a little bit more into those as well, which is pretty cool. Yeah. On the topic of corruption, though, that we were talking about earlier, something else that we see is that there's a shift between how people view Christians. Originally, Christianity, believers were willing to die for their faith. They were to the point of death. But after Constantinople made Christianity the state religion, it became politically and socially advantageous to identify as a Christian. So now you have these Christians who claim that they're Christians but may not be Christians. And so then corruption starts springing up. And so the Christian heroes move from being bishops who were eaten by lions in Roman arenas to hermits in the desert, these monks who went and separated themselves and made their monasteries. You have various monks, some notable ones. St. Anthony is a really cool dude. There's some cool stories about him casting out demons out of wolves, which is, very, very interesting.
I mean, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
Demons
They're
and
trying
pigs.
In
the Bible,
Well, they're trying to eat him and kill him, and he cast the demons out, and they ran off or something. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty sick.
Yeah. You also have Jerome, some others. The most notable one that we're going to look at is Benedict. Benedict of Nursia. Have you ever heard of the Order of Benedictine monks?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
They come from this dude.
Oh,
This dude kind of revolutionized monasteries and kind of their whole spiel. He was super disciplined because he would show up to this monastery, and like half the time they were corrupt and they were like just as undisciplined as a Joe Schmo. They were just an outcast and rejected from their society, and so they just went to live, and they weren't devoted to God at all. And so he was super disciplined. Actually, he was so disciplined when he was an abbot of a monastery, his monks tried to poison him. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Just because he was so strict and so disciplined, and they're like, we need to get this guy out of here.
Yeah.
Like, he is
being a killjoy. Kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Checks out.
Yeah. He wrote the rule for his monastery. The rule is kind of famous. It basically explained what does it mean to be a monk, what does it mean in a monastery, and it talks about that particular stuff. I'm not super familiar with it, but he wrote it. He called vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience to the rule and the monastery leaders. As a monk, you had to not own anything. You had to be celibate. You had to obey the rule and the monastery leaders. I honestly, Connor, I don't think you would be a very good monk.
No, I would not be a good monk at all.
Yeah.
No, this is not me. Nope.
Yeah. Yeah. Wollston Walker says that Benedict was not a scholar, but he did have the Roman genius for administration, an earnest belief in monasticism and the ideal Christian life, and a profound knowledge of people. He was good with people, he was good with administration, and he was very, very zealous for his belief in what did it mean to be an authentic, real Christian. What does a Christian life look like? Which is one of the reasons why he's worth noting. Yeah.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah. I think we would have gotten along, but I would not if I was in his like if I was a monk in a
Oh,
monastery.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like a cool dude, but
Like
not,
as friends.
yeah, you know, not if like
yeah.
he's in charge of me. 'Cause
Yeah.
I don't do well with people in charge of me.
Yeah.
But
That makes sense.
yeah.
Speaking of people not doing well,
Mm.
Augustine.
Mm.
You know Augustine
A little bit.
a little bit. You know him a little bit.
Just a little bit, yeah.
This dude was really cool. He Augustine, he lived out his life as a pagan, indulging in everything. Zero self-control. Zero self-control at all. He, you know, fathered a bastard and all of this stuff, and just very like not a godly person. And then he converted, and God gave him the strength for self-control, and it transformed his life. And we read a little bit about, you know, his life in the Confessions. I have that book. I have not read it yet. But, you know,
I need to read that book too.
Yeah. Some notable aspects about his life that have affected Christianity today are this. So there were two different people groups who were arguing two different things. One group was arguing that in order to be Christians, you have to be pure. You have to not sin, and arguing that you could not sin as a Christian. When you're new, you don't sin anymore. You stop sinning. And Augustine was very much...
That'd be nice.
Yeah, he was very much no, you do keep on sinning. He argued for this concept of a mixed multitude in the church. You have both good people and bad people in the church. And that's not what necessarily saves you, right? It is solely the grace of God that saves you. And we are still broken. There was also this concept that, you know, people can be inherently good. People can be inherently good and perfect, and Augustine was like, no. Men are wholly evil, right? Nothing good comes from man. Everything that is good comes from God. And so us Protestants get a lot of our doctrine of grace from Augustine. There was another group that was denying the sacraments, and Augustine was very passionate against them, helping to put into a lot of structure of tradition, church tradition. And so Catholics really love him for his work on tradition, and they use a lot of his teachings on how to structure church and how to do that, which is very
interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Pretty
so
cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. It is pretty cool.
Makes me want to read the Confessions now.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I've heard it's pretty good.
Yeah, I have heard is too. This concept that we are wholly unable to control ourselves, and only God is the one who can give us self-control, and by His grace, right? It is only His grace. People, you know, who believe in like Calvinists, who are very hard on the elect and predestination, pull from Augustine as a core person who talked about predestination and about grace and about the elect, and so they get a lot of their stuff from his talk on grace as well. Which is
everyone gets their stuff from Augustine.
Calvinists, other Protestants,
Protestants,
Catholics.
Man,
Very influential dude. Very influential dude. Wow, this is long.
I know. This is only half of it.
Yeah. Wow.
Almost there.
Almost there. Yeah. The last person that we're gonna look at, the last hero, is a man by the name of Leo. Do you know Leo at all?
I know nothing of Leo.
Nope. The Bishop Leo, Bishop of Rome, Leo. He ultimately became eternalized as the Pontifex Maximus, right? He's considered by non-Catholics as kind of like the first pope, the first pope, when the supremacy of the papacy started fully kind of taking on a life of its own. Because bishops before the 6th century were locally called popes. They were, you were called the pope, the father of the particular city. But over time, the definition of pope became more and more narrow to mean specifically the bishop of Rome is the pope. And so you kind of have this elevation of Rome. In theory, all the bishops were equal, but in practice, they really weren't. Like, there were certain bishops that had more power than others, solely based upon what city you were for. If you were the bishop of Rome or Constantinople, you had a lot more power than, say, a bishop of a small town. Yeah, and so you were there was prestige for which particular city that you were the bishop of. And so that kind of evolved into the papacy, which is this concept that Peter and Paul, Peter's the rock, right? Jesus gives him the keys of the kingdom.
I thought that was Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah,
sorry,
Dwayne the Rock Johnson.
Bad joke.
Peter the Rock Apostle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Same guy.
Yeah. And so they claim, they claim Cornelius as another pope and whatnot. I'm not Catholic, but if you are, it's fine. I have a different perspective.
Alex gives you permission to be Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, and so you have these two different, something you see really contrasted is the difference between Constantinople and Rome. And we'll see next time how this separation between Constantinople and Rome becomes so severe that there ends up being the Great Schism because of it. Rome had the traditional power. That's where the apostles died. That's where Peter and Paul died. They had a lot of power in tradition. They were more the center of the West and the Latin Church, whereas Constantinople had more of the political power, because Constantine moved the capital to Constantinople, and so they had all the political power, and kind of took control of the East, or the Greek church. And so you have the church in the West, which is mostly Rome's in charge, and then you have the church in the East, which mostly Constantinople is in charge. It's not exactly the same system as the papacy, where he has complete authority over all the other churches, but he is kind of the head. They refer to him as the first among equals. It's kind of the concept, which is very interesting.
Indeed.
Yeah, and that's kind of sitting. We'll see what happens next time as we enter into the age of the Christian Middle Ages, which would be really interesting. Kind of sets the stage for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are your thoughts?
No, I got nothing.
Yeah, you got nothing?
Yeah. Nope.
This is kind of a brutal episode.
It is pretty brutal, yeah. If you've made it to the end, good on you.
Bro, yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah.
You did it.
If you made it to the end, you're probably like Logan.
Yeah, probably. Yep.
Yeah. That makes sense. All right. Well, we'll catch you guys next time. And as we wrap up this particular segment.